Dr. Aris Thorne of the Zalosian Scholarly Concord adjusted the magnification on his ocular sensor, a delicate crystalline lens that floated a hand's width from his primary eye. Below, in the grand orientation amphitheater of the Ethelgard Interstellar Command Academy, milled the newest clutch of cadets. They were a vibrant, chaotic tapestry of galactic life. The hulking, granite-skinned Gorgons of Cygnus X1, the slender, multi-jointed Cathar with their chittering mandibles, and the Valkyrie, radiating an aura of patrician confidence in their gleaming silver and blue uniforms. Aris, as the Academy's chief xenobiologist and historical tactician, found the first day of every cycle to be a fascinating, if predictable, affair. He catalogued the subtle displays of dominance, the nervous clustering of prey-descended species, the lone wolf posturing of predators. All followed established evolutionary and cultural patterns. Then they entered. The amphitheater's ambient hum did not so much quiet as it did curdle. A subtle tension, a primal tightening, rippled through the assembled species. It was a wave of pure, instinctual wrongness that even Aris, a member of a species that had forgotten the meaning of fear 5 millennia ago, could feel as a dissonant chord in his neural net. There were two of them. Bipedal, symmetrical. They walked with a fluid, forward-driving gait that was disturbingly efficient, their limbs swinging in a contralateral motion that suggested immense momentum and balance. They were clad in the simple gray fatigues of new initiates, yet the fabric seemed stretched taut over dense, corded musculature that was simply not proportional to their size. By galactic standards, they were of average height, yet they seemed to occupy more space, to possess a greater physical weight. The cadet nearest to Aris, a young Grenchen named Xyler, began to tremble. His large, liquid black eyes, set wide on the sides of his head for panoramic vision, were fixed on the newcomers. His delicate scent stalks, which usually swayed gently to sample the air, were retracted tight against his skull. Aris knew the Grenchen fear response intimately. It was the instinct of a plains-grazing herbivore that had just scented a carnivore upwind. What are they?" Xyler whispered, his voice a reedy tremor. "Cadets, designation human," Aris replied, his own voice a series of soft, resonant chimes. "From the Sol system, Sector 001. A previously uncharted and insignificant arm of the galaxy, one of the humans, the male, scanned the room. His head swiveled with a disconcerting smoothness, but it was his eyes that triggered the deepest alarms. They were set forward in his skull, overlapping their fields of view to grant stereoscopic vision. Depth perception, the unmistakable mark of a pursuit predator. They were a pale, piercing blue, and they didn't just see, they assessed, weighed. Measured, the other human, a female, was slightly smaller but moved with an even greater sense of coiled potential. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, accentuating the sharp planes of her face. She was still, her gaze sweeping the room in short, economical movements. Where the male seemed to project a wary openness, she projected an absolute, chilling stillness. She was a rock in the current, and the current broke around her. The male human's face suddenly contorted. His lips pulled back from his teeth in a flash of white. Xyler flinched so violently he nearly fell, emitting a low, guttural moan of terror. "A threat display," the Grenchen stammered. "He is baring his fangs." "I do not believe so," Aris murmured, though he made a note. The gesture was directed at another cadet who had offered a hesitant, three-fingered wave of greeting. The human's posture was not aggressive, fascinating. A submissive or placatory gesture that mimics a threat display. The potential for misinterpretation is staggering. They found their assigned seating near Xyler. The male, whose datapad identified him as Liam Hex Hexler, offered the terrified Grenchen the same teeth-baring gesture. "Hey there, name's Liam." His voice was a low-frequency rumble, another classic predator trait designed to travel long distances without startling prey until it was too late. Xyler could not speak. He could only stare at the human's mouth, at the flat-topped incisors and sharp canines, omnivorous dentition, the most adaptable and dangerous of all, and at the unsettlingly intelligent light in those forward-facing eyes. The female, Eva Wraith Rostova, simply gave Xyler a slow, deliberate blink before turning her attention to the podium. To the Grenchen, it was the dispassionate blink of a hunting cat sizing up a meal. The first physical trial was held the next day in the centripetal gravity wing. The commandant believed in forging cadets in adversity. The standard for the endurance trial was a 10-kilometer run under 1.5 times standard galactic gravity, or G. For most species, it was a grueling ordeal. The low-gravity Cathar struggled to even stand, their slender limbs buckling. The Gorgons from a 1.2 G world plodded along, their rocky hides making every step a percussive slam. The humans stood on the starting line, stretching. They bounced on the balls of their feet, a light, springy motion that looked utterly alien on the high-gravity track. Aris Thorn observed from the gallery, his sensor lens focused. Kalen, the lead Valkyrie cadet, watched them with an expression of aristocratic contempt. The Valkyrie, while not physically powerful, prided themselves on their technological prowess and refined control, excelling in zero-G maneuvering and energy weapon accuracy. To them, this brute physicality was primitive. The starting chime echoed. The pack of cadets surged forward. The Gorgons thudded, the Cathar scrambled, the Valkyrie paced themselves with disciplined grace, and the humans jogged. It was not a sprint. It was a relaxed, loping gait, their arms pumping rhythmically, their breathing deep and even. They moved as if the increased gravity was a pleasant, invigorating pressure, like a weighted blanket. Within the first kilometer, they were weaving through the pack. By the third, they were lapping the slowest cadets. Hexler had a slight smile on his face, the gesture that had so terrified Zyler. Ristova's expression was neutral, her focus absolute. What unnerved Aris most was the sweat. A sheen of liquid appeared on their skin, darkening their gray fatigues, a liquid-based thermoregulatory system. Inefficient in some ways, but it granted them a stamina that was simply beyond the pale. They could shed waste heat through phase change cooling, allowing them to maintain peak exertion for terrifyingly long periods. They were persistence hunters. They didn't need to be the fastest. They just needed to outlast everything else. They finished the 10 kilometers together, side by side, barely winded. They slowed to a walk, their chests heaving in a controlled, powerful rhythm, steam rising from their bodies in the cool air of the wing. They had not just won, they had failed to understand that it was supposed to be difficult. Kalen finished a full 7 minutes later, his genetically perfected respiratory system working at its limit. He saw the humans casually stretching, their recovery time almost instantaneous. He saw the looks of awe and fear on the other cadets' faces, and he felt a hot spike of resentment. These animals were making a mockery of the Academy's standards. Later that cycle in his office, Aris Thorn cross-referenced the initial data packet on Sol 3 designation, Earth, with his observations. He pulled up the environmental specs and felt a cold dread, a feeling his species had genetically engineered out of themselves, creep back in. "Chief Analyst," he chimed, hailing his colleague, a prim Lorjahan named Fenth. "I need you to verify these planetary metrics for Sol 3. "Of course, Doctor," Fenth's voice replied. "Gravity, 9.81 ms2, approximately 1.4 standard GS at the surface. Axial tilt, 23.5 degrees, resulting in extreme seasonal temperature variance. Tectonics, highly active, widespread volcanism and seismic instability. Atmosphere, 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen. Doctor, is this correct?" 21% free oxygen, the corrosive. "It is correct, Fenth," Aris said, his thoughts racing. High gravity explaining their muscle density, extreme seasons forcing biological adaptability. But the oxygen, a highly volatile corrosive gas, fueling metabolic rates to an absurd degree. And then he saw the final section, biosphere. It was a catalog of horrors, billions of years of unbroken competitive evolution. A world where everything, from the microscopic to the monolithic, was locked in a constant, violent struggle for survival. Everything was food for something else. Every niche was filled by tooth and claw, poison and venom, camouflage and mimicry. Their world was a crucible of such impossible violence that the emergence of sapience wasn't just unlikely, it should have been statistically impossible. An intelligent species had to be cooperative, gentle, nurturing. It needed a safe, stable environment to develop complex thought. Earth was not safe, it was not stable. The humans were not the product of a gentle cradle, they were the product of a slaughterhouse. "Fenth," Aris chimed, the crystalline lens trembling slightly. "The humans, they're not just from a high-gravity world. From a Deathworld, a Class 12 Deathworld. We are trying to integrate the apex predator of a planetary graveyard into our military." A long silence stretched over the comm. "The first ancestors," Fenth finally whispered. "What have we done?" The discovery of the human's nature was not a single event, but a series of cascading revelations, each more unsettling than the last. The initial observations of their physicality gave way to a dawning horror at their inherent capabilities. The hand-to-hand combat drills were the next major indicator. The instructor, Master Vrieg, was a towering insectoid with 4 powerful arms and a patient, methodical teaching style. The standard galactic form of unarmed combat was a highly ritualized art, focusing on pressure points and nerve strikes that were effective against the broadest range of biologies. It was elegant, precise, and predictable. Kalen, the Valkyrie, was a master of the form. His movements were a blur of silver blue, striking the training drone with perfect, almost beautiful precision. He received top marks, his arrogance swelling with the praise. Then it was Eva Rostova's turn. She stepped onto the mat, her opponent a lumbering Gorgon twice her mass. The Gorgon charged, a tactic of pure brute force. Rostova did not meet the charge, she flowed around it. In a motion too quick for most to follow, she sidestepped, her body dipping low. She didn't strike a nerve cluster. She slammed the hardened edge of her hand into the back of the Gorgon's knee joint. There was a sickening crack as the simulated frailty registered a catastrophic joint failure. The Gorgon bellowed and stumbled. Rostova was already moving, using his momentum against him. She flowed onto his back, one arm snaking around his thick neck, her other hand gripping his shoulder for leverage. It wasn't a recognized hold. It was a predatory anatomical reality. A choke. The Gorgon flailed, but she was a part of him, a terrible growth he couldn't shake. Within 5 seconds, the simulation registered oxygen deprivation to the brain. The match was over, a profound silence filled the training hall. Master Vrieg's mandibles clicked slowly. He had never seen anything like it. There was no artifice, no ritual. It was just brutal efficiency. She had identified a series of cascading biological failures and executed the sequence flawlessly. It wasn't combat, it was applied butchery. Hex Hexler's turn came later. His style was different, but no less frightening. He used misdirection, feints, and an uncanny ability to absorb punishment. A Cathar opponent landed a solid simulated strike to his ribs that would have incapacitated any other cadet. Hex grunted, his body twisting with the blow, and used the rotation to power a sweeping kick that took the Cathar's legs out from under him. His pain tolerance was unnatural. He treated injury not as a failure state, but as a tactical resource. This duality began to define them. Rostova was the silent huntress, the embodiment of lethal precision. Hexler was the brawling pack leader, a being of terrifying resilience and surprising cunning. The true test came during the Ghost Spire tactical simulation. It was a rite of passage for first-year cadets. Infiltrate a 100-story fortified tower, bypass automated defenses, and retrieve a data core from the penthouse. Kalen's team of 4 Valkyrie went first. They were a vision of technological superiority, their simulated HUDs networking flawlessly. They blasted their way through the lower levels with coordinated plasma fire, a direct and overwhelming assault. They reached the objective, but their casualty rating was 75%, and they were 20% over the allotted time. It was considered an acceptable, if costly, success. Then it was the human squad. The algorithm had saddled them with Xyler the Grenchen and a skittish, bird-like avian named Pri. Both were visibly terrified to be on a team with the Deathworlders. "All right, team," Hex said, his voice calm and low in their comms. His smile, they were learning, wasn't a threat, but it wasn't exactly comforting either. It was the expression of someone who was enjoying the challenge. Standard breach and clear is a sucker's game. The moment we fire a shot, the whole tower knows where we are. Wraith, you're on point. Find us a quiet way in. Wraith. The call sign was chillingly appropriate. Eva Rostova didn't even acknowledge the order verbally. She simply melted into the simulated twilight at the base of the tower. For 3 minutes the comms were silent. Xyler's heart hammered against his ribs. Pri kept nervously preening his wing feathers. "Got something," Eva's voice crackled, devoid of emotion. "Sub-level maintenance conduit, heat-shielded, leads to the primary climate control shaft. It'll be dark, tight, and it bypasses the first 40 floors of sentry guns." "Heard the lady," Hex said. "Let's go for a walk." What followed was, for Xyler and Pri, a masterclass in terror and awe. The humans moved through the pitch-black conduit not with technological assistance, but with their innate senses. They navigated by the faint vibrations in the walls, the subtle shifts in air pressure. When Pri nearly dislodged a loose panel, Hex's hand shot out in the darkness and steadied him with unyielding strength before a sound could be made. They emerged into the central shaft, a vast, vertical space. Law's grids pulsed in deadly patterns. Hex didn't consult a schematic, he just watched. For a full minute he stared at the shifting web of energy. "There," he whispered, pointing. "The cycle is off by 0.02 seconds every third rotation. Gives us a 1.3-second window to cross." "Pri, you're the fastest. On my mark," Pri squawked in protest. "The sensors can't even detect that small a discrepancy." "I can," Hex stated simply. Trusting the impossible, Pri launched himself across the gap on Hex's command and made it. The rest followed. They moved through the tower like specters, a ghost squad. Eva would disable security cameras with precisely aimed, low-power shots that merely overloaded the sensors rather than destroying them, leaving no obvious signs of tampering. Hex seemed to have a sixth sense for patrol drone routes. They didn't fight the system, they flowed through its cracks. It was their pack dynamic that was most unnerving. They barely spoke. A hand signal, a glance, a subtle shift in posture was all they needed. They moved in perfect predatory concert. Hex and Eva instinctively took positions that covered Xyler and Pre, flanking them, guarding them. For the first time in his life, Xyler felt the presence of a predator behind him and felt safe. It was a deeply conflicting, psychologically shattering experience. He was prey, but he was their prey, and they would not let anything else touch him. It was the terrifying, possessive loyalty of the pack. They reached the penthouse without firing a single shot in aggression. They retrieved the data core and were exfiltrating when they finally ran into a patrol of elite security drones. Wraith, psych warfare, Hex ordered, his voice tight. Eva Rostova leaned out from behind a pillar and did something no alien tactician could have ever conceived of. She screamed. It was not a scream of fear. It was a high-pitched, piercing, predatory war cry. It was the sound of a thing that hunted in the dark, a sound designed to trigger a primal, cascading system failure in the amygdala of any creature with a survival instinct. The drones, being machines, were unaffected, but the sound echoed through the tower's comm system, which Kalen's team was monitoring from the observation deck. The Valkyrie flinched back. Xyler collapsed into a trembling ball. It was a sound that said, "I am the thing your ancestors hid from in the dark." Then all hell broke loose. The humans didn't engage in a firefight. They used the environment. Hex kicked a heavy decorative plinth over, creating a barricade. Eva threw a metallic sculpture into a power conduit, causing a massive electrical arc that shorted out two drones. They used flash, bang, and confusion. They were chaos incarnate. They weren't soldiers, they were insurgents. They were survivors. They completed the simulation with 0 casualties, in less than half the time of Kalen's squad, and with only 3 shots fired from their actual weapons. In the observation deck, a stunned silence reigned. Kalen's face was a mask of cold fury. These primitives, these brutes, had not only bested him, they had done it with tactics that were dishonorable, chaotic, and utterly, undeniably superior. He looked at the other cadets, at the respect and fear now aimed at the humans, and knew this could not stand. His species' supremacy, his own personal honor, demanded a response. Later, in the mess hall, Kalen and his cohort confronted the humans. "Tactics were without honor, Deathworlder," Kalen hissed, standing over Hex's table. Hex looked up from his meal, a slab of high-protein nutrient paste he was eating with relish. He chewed slowly, then swallowed. His friendly demeanor evaporated, replaced by a profound and unnerving stillness. His blue eyes became flat and cold as glacial ice. "Honor is a luxury for those who have never had to fight for a meal," Hex said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. "My honor is getting my squad home alive. You should try it sometime." Saw something in that moment, in the absolute lack of fear in the human's eyes. He saw a creature that was not just capable of violence, but one that understood it on a cellular level. He saw a predator looking at a rival, and for the first time in his pampered, aristocratic life, Kalen felt a genuine flicker of primal fear. It made him even more furious. "There are other ways to test skill," Kalen said, his voice tight. "Arenas where brute strength and savage tricks will not avail you. My cohort formally challenges yours, the Crimson Gauntlet, next rotation, unless of course your courage fails you outside of the shadows." Entire mess hall went silent. The Crimson Gauntlet was not a training exercise. It was a crucible, a brutal squad-on-squad combat simulation reserved for graduating command track elites. For first years to issue such a challenge was unheard of. To accept it was suicide. Hex looked at Eva. She gave a barely perceptible nod, her eyes fixed on Kalen, her expression one of utter predatory focus. Hex turned back to the Valkyrie, and for the first time his smile reached his eyes. It was not a friendly smile. It was the grin of a wolf that had just been invited into a sheep pen. "We accept." The news of the challenge sent a shockwave through Ethelgard Academy. The Crimson Gauntlet was legend. Its simulation arena was a sprawling, multi-level urban ruin known as the Shattered Precinct. A maze of collapsed hab blocks, treacherous under tunnels, and kill zones masquerading as open plazas. It was designed to test every facet of command-level strategy, team cohesion, and combat prowess under extreme duress. It was a meat grinder. The commandant, a veteran of a dozen campaigns whose species was so ancient they communicated primarily through shifts in their personal electromagnetic fields, sanctioned the match. His interest in the Terran anomaly had overridden all precedent. He, along with Dr. Aris Thorne and the entire command staff, would observe from the panoramic gallery overlooking the simulation chamber. The terms were set, 4 on 4. Kalen had his elite Valkyrie cohort, a team that had trained together for years. their movements and thoughts synchronized by neural links and cultural osmosis. They were equipped with the finest simulated gear. Valkyrie plasma rifles with superior range and accuracy, personal energy shields, and advanced sensor suites. The human team was a study in contrast. Hex and Eva were the core, but per the rules, they had to field a full squad of 4. Xyler, buoyed by a strange mix of terror and the memory of the protection he'd felt in the Ghost's spire, volunteered. He was a sensor specialist, his natural Grenchian sensitivity to atmospheric and seismic shifts giving him an edge no technology could replicate. The fourth was Pri, the avian marksman, whose sharp eyes and ability to briefly hover made him an ideal scout. They were not a team. They were a collection of disparate, terrified individuals led by 2 impossible creatures from a world of nightmares. Their gear was standard issue. Aris Thorn watched from the gallery as the 2 teams entered the arena at opposite ends. The Valkyrie moved with arrogant precision, spreading into a textbook diamond formation, their shields shimmering. They were the image of modern, civilized warfare. The human team was different. They huddled for a moment. Hex was speaking, his voice too low for the gallery's audio pickups to catch. Xyler and Pri were nodding, their fear still palpable but now overlaid with a grim focus. Then, Hex clapped Xyler on the shoulder, a gesture that would have once made the Grenchian faint. Now Xyler simply braced himself, his sense stalks twitching, scanning the environment. Eva gave Pri a curt nod, pointing toward a high, precarious ruin. Pri took off, his wings beating silently, and found a sniper's nest. "They're breaking formation," one of the Valkyrie instructors noted with disdain. "They are tactically inept. Kalen's squad will eliminate them within minutes." Aris wasn't so sure. He zoomed his ocular sensor on Hexler. The human wasn't looking at the Valkyrie positions. He was looking at the ground, at the sky, at the crumbling walls. He was reading the environment, not the enemy. The match began. The Valkyrie advanced, their plasma bolts searing the air, pinning down Hex and Xyler's position behind a wrecked transport. It was a classic suppressing fire tactic. "They are trapped," the Valkyrie instructor gloated. "No," Aris whispered. "They are anchored." Plasma fire was intense, each bolt a splash of simulated heat and energy that would register as a debilitating wound. Any other species would be panicking, trying to return fire or retreat. Hex was doing something else entirely. He was counting. 3-round burst, 0.5-second delay for target acquisition, 2-second cooling cycle. Hex's voice came over the spectator comms, calm and analytical. "Xyler, can you feel the impacts?" They are heavy," Xyler stammered, his body pressed against the metal hull. "They are focusing on the center of mass. They are not trying to flank. They don't think they need to," Hex said. A plasma bolt struck sparks inches from his head. He didn't even flinch. "They think we're cornered rats. Wraith, you clear?" Eva's voice was like ice. "Clear." Kalen, from his command position, felt a surge of triumph. The primitives were pinned. Now they would simply advance and execute them. He gestured for his flankers, Lyran and Vosh, to move up. Lyran moved fluidly along the left side of the plaza, his shield deflecting stray debris. He scanned the rubble, his rifle at the ready. He saw nothing. He felt secure. He was a Valkyrie, the pinnacle of martial evolution. He was the hunter. He was wrong. From the deep shadow of a collapsed archway, a darker shadow detached itself. Eva Rostova moved without a sound. She wasn't using a stealth field. She was simply using the natural camouflage of the environment with a skill that bordered on supernatural. She didn't attack Lyran from behind. She emerged at his side, inside his arc of fire, inside his reaction time. Before Lyran could even register the threat, her hand shot out and clamped over the muzzle of his plasma rifle. Her other hand, holding her own sidearm, pressed against the faint shimmer of his personal shield at point-blank range. One shot. The shield flared and died. A second shot to the chest. A solid red light appeared on Lyran's armor. Eliminated, Eva didn't pause to admire her work. She melted back into the shadows before Vosh, Lyran's partner, could even turn to see what happened. "Lyran is down." Kalen's voice was sharp with disbelief. "Status." "What was his position?" "Unknown," Vosh reported, his voice laced with panic. No visual on the attacker, no energy signature, psychological warfare. The scream in the tower had been a battle cry. This was infinitely worse. Silence. A ghost had just taken one of them, and they had no idea where it was. The Valkyrie advance faltered. They began scanning the shadows, their perfect formation breaking as paranoia set in. Every flicker of movement, every gust of wind was now a potential threat. "Pri, you see Vosh?" Hex's voice cut through the tension. "Affirmative," the avian chirped from his perch. "He's distracted." "Exposed from above." "Him." A single sharp report echoed through the plaza. Miles away, figuratively, Pri's rifle simulator barked once. Vosh's head snapped back, his elimination light blinking on. Two down, Kalen was stunned. He had lost half his squad in under a minute without even seeing the enemy. "Fall back, form a defensive perimeter," he yelled, his composure finally cracking. "They're spooked," Hex said to Xyler. "Now we move." Hex broke cover, but not toward the Valkyrie. He ran in the opposite direction, toward the labyrinthine undertunnels, Xyler scrambling after him. It was the last thing Kalen expected. They were ceding the high ground, the open territory. They were running into a death trap. They flee into the darkness. Kalen's remaining teammate, Jorik, spat. "The cowards! They are not fleeing," Eris Thorn said to no one in particular in the gallery. The other instructors were leaning forward now, their earlier smugness gone. "They are changing the hunting ground." Battle moved into the claustrophobic confines of the tunnels. Here, the Valkyrie's long-range rifles and sensor suites were less effective. It was a close-quarters nightmare of blind corners and echoing sounds. And it was here that the humans were most at home. For the next 10 minutes, the humans became the monsters in the dark. Eva was a phantom, her presence felt but never seen. A discarded piece of metal would clatter down a side tunnel, drawing Kalen's attention, while Hex and Xyler slipped past them in the opposite direction. Xyler, using his innate senses, became their sonar, detecting the faint vibrations of the Valkyrie's armored boots through the concrete floor. Two of them, Xyler whispered, huddled with Hex behind a massive pillar. Directly ahead. "Stationary, they're setting an ambush," Hex breathed. "Wraith, you in position." Above them came the disembodied reply. Eva had scaled a sheer maintenance shaft, her high-gravity muscles allowing her to find purchase where none should exist. "On my mark," Hex said. He took a deep breath, then did the last thing a soldier should do. He turned on the light on his rifle. The powerful beam cut through the darkness, illuminating him completely. "Hey, Valkyrie." "Over here," he yelled, his voice echoing. Jorik snarled, raising his rifle. "He's revealed himself." Both Jorik and Kalen opened fire, the corridor filled with the searing light of plasma bolts. Hex dove back behind the pillar, the wall where he'd been standing erupting in molten ruin, but his gambit had worked. For 3 critical seconds, both remaining Valkyrie had been focused on his light, their gazes drawn, their muzzles aimed. From the ceiling above them, Eva dropped down. She landed silently between them, a specter of vengeance. 2 shots perfectly placed. Jorik and Kalen's elimination lights flared on in the sudden darkness. The simulation ended. Victory, silence. Absolute profound silence in the observation gallery. The Valkyrie instructors stared, aghast. The commandant's electromagnetic field pulsed with a complex, unreadable emotion. Eris Thorn leaned back, the ocular sensor retracting. He finally understood. He had been looking at the humans all wrong. He had seen them as predators, as killers, as survivors. But he had failed to grasp the unifying principle. Humanity's greatest strength was not their endurance, their strength, or their predatory instincts. It was their adaptability. They were masters of context. In the open, they used psychological warfare and guerrilla tactics. In the darkness, they became monsters. When faced with superior technology, they refused to play the game, instead changing the rules of the battlefield to suit their strengths. They were not just the apex predator of a single world. They were the ultimate problem solvers. Their entire evolution was a series of impossible problems solved through sheer, bloody-minded persistence and ingenuity. In the mess hall that evening, the atmosphere was different. No one sat at the humans' table, but the space around it was not one of ostracism, but of deference. A wide berth born of a new, deeply ingrained respect and a healthy dose of fear. Kalen was not present. He had been placed on medical leave for acute psychological stress. Xyler and Pre sat with Hex and Eva. The Grenchen was not trembling. He was slowly eating his nutrient paste, his side-of-the-head gaze occasionally flicking toward his human teammates with a look of complex awe. "You knew," Xyler said quietly to Hex. "You knew they would react to the light like that." Hex took a sip of water. "On my world, we have these little insects, moths. They navigate by the moon, a light source that's effectively at infinity. But if you light a candle, they get confused. They try to keep the candle at the same angle, and they spiral in and burn themselves up. Their greatest strength becomes their fatal flaw." He shrugged. "Kalen and his team, they're moths. They navigate by the light of their own superiority. All I did was light a candle." It was the most terrifyingly profound tactical summary Eris Thorn, listening in from a distance, had ever heard. He had based his analysis on biology and evolution. He had forgotten to account for poetry. Eva, who had been silent the entire time, looked at Xyler. "You did well," she said. The 2 words coming from her were like a medal of honor. Xyler's scent stalk swayed just once in a gesture of acknowledgement. He was still prey and they were still predators, but he understood now. The human pack did not just hunt together, they protected their own. And he somehow had become one of them. The galaxy had wanted soldiers. It had received something far more complicated. As Hex began to tell a quiet story about watching a thunderstorm from a mountaintop on Earth, Eris Thorne finally wrote his concluding report, subject, Terran Cadets, conclusion. The integration of humanity into the galactic community represents a paradigm shift of existential proportions. They are not merely Deathworlders. They are a species that has mastered the art of thriving in hell. Their capacity for brutality is matched only by their capacity for cooperation and abstract thought. They are warriors, engineers, poets, and monsters, often all at once. We sought to teach them our ways of war, but the lesson we have learned is this. We are children playing with thunder sticks, and we have just invited the masters of the storm to join our game. The future of our galaxy will not be determined by how we treat the humans, but by how they, in their impossible complexity, decide to treat us.